Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our next presenter is Paul Stonehill. Now, I don't know Paul personally. I only know him by reputation. But I'll tell you a few things about him. He's a Soviet-born researcher of both Russian and Asian mysteries. And we know him best as being the co-author of Mysterious Skies with Philip Mentel. And this is perhaps the definitive current look at ufological matters in Russia. His presentation for us today is going to highlight the book's best cases, but also a few never before revealed new ones as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Stonehill.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll get down to business. The book itself, yes, it shows the phenomena known as UFO phenomena in the old Soviet Union, Russia, pre-revolutionary Russia, and some of the current cases. What's most important, you need to understand that there is another universe, which was the Soviet Union and today's Russia, where UFOs had been studied very intensely by experienced and trained observers, Soviet Army, Soviet scientific establishment, the intelligence services, and we have proof. Some of the proof you will see as the young lady will be changing documents so you can see for yourself. Official documents that specify what research had been done, how it was being done, how it was being handled, how to report cases. Instructions were sent to the Soviet armed forces, all branches. What you see, you report. This is how to measure it. This is where to send information about anomalous aerial phenomena. They were too shy to say UFOs. This was forbidden. But this bloody anomalous phenomena was always present at the Soviet test sites, at the areas where they would develop new weapons that we know very little about. One thing I want you to understand, there was a very cozy and cute and close relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union on very interesting levels. So let's not be naive. When it came to UFO research, when it came to specialized space missions like the Phobos 1 and like the Phobos missions to the Phobos moonlet, Soviets and Americans and Westerners worked hand in hand. And we don't know how much information has changed hands, but believe me, quite a lot. That's why we cannot find what happened to the documents that Stalin had about Roswell phenomena. Because in 1994, my colleagues in the former Soviet Union were doing their best to get their hands on such documents, and they could not. Most of my research, not only about UFOs, but general paranormal phenomena in the old Soviet Union and Eurasia, meaning Europe and Asia, and China, because I also like to look what's going on there. It's published in Fate magazine, and you can read quite a lot about myself and about my current research areas, such as Professor Yefremov's legacy. I hope that article comes out soon. So fatemagazine.com, if you want to get in touch with me, if you need to look at some other documents, if you're interested in some of the original documents, because I'm in touch with Russian ufologists and Ukrainian, because I am from Ukraine, not from Russia, you contact me. Fate magazine will give you that chance. What I want, again, to say that the universe of UFO research was quite different and maybe more open in many ways than we have here, because you had less deceit from the military and scientists. The USSR was a secluded, isolated place. They had little knowledge of what's going on in the West. Very little. And if you wanted to know too much, you got punished. But there were enough cases, enough information in the Soviet Union to make people want to study it. Not only regular people, but top scientists like Professor Burdakov, who has done a lot for UFO research. who had worked with Sergei Korolev, father of the Soviet space program, and himself somebody who had witnessed UFOs, and somebody who put his money into the Tunguska research and expeditions, which is very, very important. I would say that the main case to propel UFO research in Russia and the Soviet Union was actually the 1908 Tunguska phenomenon. I don't know what to call it. Explosion, implosion. There are ideas that two objects or more met each other over the skies of Siberia that fateful day in 1908 and exploded. Or one object shot out from the permafrost area of Yakutia, intercepted a giant body coming into our atmosphere, about to destroy Earth, and shut it down. And it's not somebody like Grandmother Maria from some village speaking about it. Russian scientists with international names were not afraid to speak and study that. I would say that the Soviets had always, and when I say Soviets, at this point I want to say Soviet government, was always keenly interested in the whole UFO phenomenon. Basically to know, is this a danger to our armed forces? Are the Americans disguising something, sending UFOs into our airspace? So special investigation teams had been working through the period of Soviet history, and some of the best were originated in the Soviet naval counterintelligence and naval intelligence as well. And because of such people as Vladimir Azhaja, a great personality, we know a lot about what's been going on with the Soviet naval forces. Vladimir Azhaja was actually the one who had who had written down the instructions used from 1979 on, definitely through 1991, but we think in later years as well, used by naval forces and then also by aviation, by Soviet Air Force and other branches to report UFO sightings, to send them to special military institutes, one in Moscow area, one in the Moscow area, one in Leningrad, where such reports were studied. By the way, we don't know what happened to all of the research. What we do have in our hands makes your hair stand up, because we know that back in the 1980s, the Soviets already knew that there is a very unusual phenomenon that has to be dealt with. And in one of the documents, I believe they even refer to higher power, higher intelligence. Of course, they wouldn't say God, they wouldn't say anything like that, or they would be afraid to say ET civilization, although cosmonauts, some of the cosmonauts were not so shy and would come out and say, we know reports about UFOs, we believe them. We had seen them, and in the book you will see, I wish I could go through every case. Look, I made notes to talk to you, but in 1 hour, I have dozens of cases. But I do want to say, it's fascinating, because you start seeing patterns. Not only do you see patterns of gigantic objects cited by Soviet scientists, Gulag prisoners, military counterintelligence officers, KGB informants, objects like a gigantic cylindrical UFO. Very sinister object that would, and you see it flying through the pages of Soviet history. It was sighted in 1953 over the taiga. It was sighted, that's not in the book, I just found out. Report from the chief of the Pacific Fleet Intelligence Service. It was sighted in late 1970s. Exactly the same object over the Soviet Pacific Ocean area, and others. You see it sighted in 1940s over the Soviet battlefields. But there are also, then you have gigantic cylindrical objects that top Soviet brass would talk about to the newspaper people in a very interesting period of time. I don't think it will ever come again. And I don't think the Americans wanted that period of time to exist. When I say Americans, I mean the government. When the Soviet Union disintegrated, unexpectedly, a lot of information came out during the perestroika glasnost times instituted by Gorbachev. I would say we had a small window of opportunity, and I did get tons of documents, incredible documents. I'm still going through some of them. From 1991, actually from 1990 through 1992, much information came to the West. Films, documents, narratives, eyewitness reports. Freedom was in the air. I understand Russia doesn't have as much freedom anymore. That's the opinion of many people in the West. Again, I'm from Ukraine. I know what's going on in Ukraine today. I don't get into politics, but I'm very glad that Ukraine is separate from the Russian Empire. And we have our own research, and it's very interesting and ongoing. And in the book, I share contacts and addresses, and I believe email information, how to reach Ukrainian researchers, for example, in the REUP Institute. Very interesting ongoing scientific research. And also prominent Russian ufologists, Mikhail Gerstein, Vadim Chernobrov, everything is there. You want to do your own contacts, you want to do your own research, by all means. Because what the book itself, I believe it's over 400 pages, and you go through the cases and dates and so forth. But even that is only tip of the iceberg. And I hope someday we'll find out the foundation of that iceberg. But most important, I want you to carry with you from today is that those whose job it was to study UFOs for the Soviet government and the armed forces came to a conclusion that 20% of the cases cannot be explained, and maybe 4 or 5% are definitely out of our grasp of understanding. We cannot comprehend what they are. Different physical laws, yes. Are they ETs? They don't go too much into that. They just wanted to know, do they present danger? Maybe. But even back in 1940s, Stalin asked the same question of Sergei Korolev and Kapitsa and other top Soviet researchers. He placed a pile of documents before each one of them, put them in a nice secluded room with an translator, and said, study it. Let me know your conclusion. And the conclusion that he had obtained from each of the scientists was, yes, this phenomenon exists based on American documents, not Soviets. And no, it's not a threat to the Soviet armed forces, based on what we see. Now, Americans were always eagerly interested in what the Soviets were doing, and just by looking at the declassified CIA documents, and you will see them in our book, you see quite a lot. You see that American agents were very active back in the 1950s and in other times in the Soviet Union. I'll get to my point why I believe there was a very cozy cooperation. I mean, you read and you become, how should I say, infatuated with the information about the Phobos case, when JPL received daily reports from the Soviet Union, and I think vice versa. And JPL even knows what happened, I believe it knows, to the Phobos 2 spaceship that was spinned out from the orbit by a very unusual, gigantic body. We had the reports came from the Soviet Union that JPL heard noises coming from the spaceship that was long gone. And also the Soviets picked up some signals. It's all in the book. We go date by date, name by name. And so when you read a report from 1989, a very interesting interview given by one of the top scientists of that program, who mentioned a swarm of small bodies around the Soviet spaceship. I've never heard about this anywhere else. But we were able to obtain Soviet media reports compiled for us. And just based on open sources, you start seeing something really did knock that spaceship out of the orbit. Something really did destroy a program that cost Western investors a lot of money. Somebody put good money here in the West into that program. Now, again, the CIA and others, I'm sure, were following Soviet research very closely. Of course, they were interested. Why? What's going on in 1967? Well, what happened in 1967? You don't have any parallels in any of the Western research. And I don't know about China. China is a completely different case. But a group of Soviet military commanders got together with Soviet scientists who were pushing against all ceiling placed on them, asking the government to let people research UFOs. They were pushing so hard that they had enough sponsorship to be able to come to be given airtime on Soviet television in 1967 and announce to the general population of the Soviet Union, please send us your reports. UFOs are everywhere. We want to know what you see. Send them to such and such address. It was like a revolution. Not political, but a revolution in people's thinking. Now you can report what you see. Thousands of letters, cases, reports starting coming to those special entities to study. We don't know what happened to all of them. We still do not know. See, that's the problem in Russia. Documents come, and what happens to them? It's hidden in some. It's like the old Spielberg's movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. You saw what happened to the Ark. So, I don't want to say that it's so innocent in Russia. I do think that those documents are under guard. Whatever was able to leak out, whatever information, it's not going to happen anymore. Nor do I believe Americans have any more cooperation with Russia. Those days are gone. There was a very, very close period of cooperation, late 1970s, middle to late 1970s. Then the Afghanistan war destroyed everything. But you start thinking, as you read the book, and I'm not putting ideas in your mind, but you start looking at dates, information, and names, and you start thinking, they had such close cooperation. Why? Who would be interested in destroying this field of friendship? But it happened. But at the same time, some of the most interesting cases take place from 1979, I would say 1976, through the late 1980s. Some historian in the future, and I hope he uses our book too, will be able to see those were the times when unusual, gigantic, and small objects that cannot be explained would come and hover over Soviet testing grounds, over Soviet missile silos, would almost start a war in 1982. 1982, then you live through the book. What's that case about so-called gigantic swimmers? Also 1982. And then another information that I received just recently, and I talked about it, I believe, on Coast to Coast. 1982, same identical, gigantic beings sighted not far away from a very sensitive Soviet testing ground. Where does the information come from? The Setka program. What is the Setka program? Official Soviet military scientific research I mentioned that had gone through 1978 through 1991. The documents that are being shown to you on the screen, some of them are from the Setka program. This is amazing. 1982. Then I have a report, one of those few I wanted to talk to you about, but at least one I can. 1982, a scientist, Gaponov. I don't know what happened to him. He sent me a lot of information. Then he disappeared after 1995. But he did send me a report of 1982, a gigantic cylindrical, again, cigar-shaped body over one of the Soviet space technology testing centers. 1965, unusual cases come. There is a very interesting case. Now, don't be offended. It came from the Atlantic waters, not far from the United States. A Soviet submarine was very close to the United States. Again, a gigantic cigar-shaped UFO body appears, and they took note of it, and it's in the book. 1965, cases of aerial phenomena all over Soviet Union. You be sure that many of the cases had to do with Soviet experiments with new weapons and so forth, but not all. Definitely not all, and they knew it. They wanted to find out, why is it that when we test new missiles, those pesky UFOs are right over us? Aerial phenomena, I apologize. You can't say UFOs. You know, you can't, how much can you hide? You cannot, you can say this, that. It's like an old joke about Brezhnev, who was bitten by a mosquito, and he was so angry that he said, well, we can't control it, so let's declare that there is no swamp. There is no swamp, there is no mosquitoes. There is a case in the book, 1972, Soviet Arctic waters. Military people come out, see unusual disks over them. So they start calling their HQ saying, what do we do? Those disks are over us. And the report is, don't worry, they don't exist. Okay, all right. Another case, Dubna, one of the top secret Soviet and now Russian so-called scientific cities, where they were testing a new weapon system, very interesting weapon system. As they did, a gigantic UFO appears from nowhere, hovers over them for an extensive period of time. So whatever our debunkers say, it's not a comet, it's not asteroid, it's a UFO. And it's over there. And you cannot say it doesn't exist. So what happens? Those scientists start calling Moscow. What do we do? Moscow is in turmoil. Well, we can't, it's not there. But scientists, top academicians see it. Well, Moscow controls everything. Moscow doesn't control anything. I don't think Washington does, nor does Beijing, who will see a lot of UFOs too. But there are people who want to control things. And I want something, I was so amazed. When I started, I was a kid when I met somebody in the Soviet Union who was a pilot who had been serving in the Arctic areas of the Soviet Union, who had witnessed a UFO. And I believe they even tried, onboard Gatling gun, trying to shoot it down. But they didn't. And that's how my interest developed. And believe me, there was enough information to keep on going even in the old Soviet Union. Magazines such as Technika Молодежи, and you will see references to the book. Enough people with curiosity to go on and study. And then you had names like Ziegel, Felix Ziegel and his group, Gindelis, and a very sad case of somebody who had been a top researcher in this whole Setka program and who disappeared. It's a woman and one of the best Soviet researchers, very keen personality. She suffered a personal tragedy and she thought it was because of her research. Not from the Soviet side, somebody else did it, and not the Americans. So she disappeared, and no matter how her colleagues tried to find her, they could not, even with all the capacities of the Soviet system. So you see quite a lot of what's going on. People went on, and we give date by date, trying to see what's going on, trying to form groups. Some of them, like Azhaja, got spanked very badly. But Azhaja had good friends, and if the communist ideologues who say mosquitoes don't exist, they try to put him down. Well, his friends in the naval forces, and having family that served in the Russian naval forces through different systems, I'm very proud of them, because of their readiness as compared to other Soviet armed forces. Let's say they have less drunks, and they're... I know, but seriously, always, I don't want to make fun because, military forces are military forces, and they do have training, and they had spirit to fight, to research, to study, but the naval forces were some of the best, and you will see proof. Plus, they had very interesting objects to deal with. And military counterintelligence personnel in the Soviet naval armed forces and Russian naval armed forces, they had to be ready for everything, and apparently they were. They met gigantic submarines, objects, so-called croakers. You will see it in the book. It's very interesting and detailed case to go into. Again, taking place from 1975 to 1980. What happened to the research? Some of it is locked away in naval archives. We obtained quite a lot to make some of the most interesting pages in the book itself. What I want to get back to is that people wanted to study. After after my interest, after I got my interest in the whole subject, I met interesting people, and I continued getting information even after I was a refugee, came to the United States. It wasn't easy. It was much easier after 1987, I would say. When my articles were published 15, 16 years ago, some of the people here whose existence is locked away in trying to say that UFOs do not exist, one of the debunkers, who doesn't like me very much, I think was disturbed to the point that when an article about my research came out in Omni magazine, a report, I think in the same magazine, came out saying that all information from the Soviet Union should be forbidden from being published, something like that, that in the United States, not to let information coming from the Soviet Union to be presented. Why? And I said, what is it that I report, or that I write about, that scares them so much? What is it? And you know what? My conclusion is this. There had been, not has been, but had been a very close relationship, an exchange of information. Spying aside, because this will always go on. And during the period of the perestroika and glasnost, too much came out for some people to be comfortable here at the top and maybe in a few other areas. And that's why they, and whoever their agents are, started making accusations, denunciations, trying to make sure that nothing comes out. I don't want to put spin on my research. That's why I provide addresses and information, because I want people who are interested to contact Russian researchers directly. I see my mission is to bring information out and present it here, to be like a bridge. I think it's a one-way bridge. It's becoming a one-way bridge. But still, there's much information in the hands of Russian researchers such as Gerstein and Chernobrov. What they don't have is money. It's very difficult in today's Russia to go on with that research. Officially, there is no more government-sponsored UFO research. Only official, I'm sure they go on. No way current Russian government would not pursue something like that. Actually, there were rumors a couple of years ago that Putin was about to release some information. Very interesting. I hope so. I also know that Ukraine has possessed some of the files of the old Soviet Strategic Air Force. Going back to 2000, 2001, there were reports in the Russian and Ukrainian media that Russians were pressuring Ukraine to get, if Ukraine wants to get good gas, natural gas deals, they have to transfer those archives to Russia. There is a lot of information that makes them apprehensive. Just as apprehensive as having nuclear weapons in some God-forsaken place. That's why a lot of it was transferred to Russia. Maybe this information is now transferred to Russia too. I just don't think that much of it is being transferred to Washington anymore. So it was a very interesting period of cooperation. And believe me, there was a lot to see. I will always underline and stress wherever I do presentations. Trained observers in the old Soviet Union and prior to that in the Russian Empire had sighted UFOs, had put down their sightings on paper, and were not afraid to come out with that. I have a chapter about astronomers. I wanted to make a point about astronomers because there's lying from our debunkers and from the Soviets. At least one famous cosmonaut saying, astronomers don't see anything. Oh, no, no. Astronomers come out and say, here's what I saw in 1965. I cannot explain it. Baltic states, Azerbaijan, top Soviet astronomers say, this is a UFO. This cannot exist according to our laws of physics, but it does. And they were not afraid to publish it in the newspapers. Again, after Stalin, Khrushchev was doing a lot of changes. You may remember him with the shoe, but because my parents and grandparents, lived in those periods of time, Khrushchev did a lot for the Soviet Union in terms of releasing prisoners from concentration camps. My father had seen that. It's not a pretty picture to see female prisoners of concentration camp being let out. Women, young women looking like elderly ladies and much. I don't want to get into it. A lot of interesting information you can see in Fate magazine articles about different periods, not UFOs, but different periods and Soviet paranormal phenomena and so forth. Khrushchev did a lot. And what I want to say is that some freedom, Solzhenitsyn was able to publish some of his works then. Some freedom came because of him. Brezhnev was somebody who like I said, mosquitoes don't exist. Okay, but at the same time, there wasn't oppressive regime like under Stalin. You could talk, you could exchange information. If you talk too much and you would say, well, let's do something about the regime, then you suffered. But UFO information you could get your hands on, even in the underground, in the samizdat. And you will see dates and names in the book. And you could see how people were trying to read, to exchange information. And even the 1967 case that I started to talk about, I don't want to forget it. When they appeal to the general population, and names are given, not just, who they are, what they were, scientists and especially military. This is very fascinating. And there is one personality, General Stolyarov, that we don't know too much about and what pushed him. But he was very instrumental. And so the group that was organized in the Soviet so-called House of Cosmonautics, and you will see the full name, that group existed, exchanged information and so forth. Then I think at the top, this cozy relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union flourished to the point that somebody said enough is enough, and they slammed it down. So other people in the Soviet armed forces, other generals, I don't want to say staged a coup because they were definitely directed, they shut down this freedom of, let's say, freedom of UFO research. Everything was shut down. And denunciation articles appeared in Soviet media. And I believe so American debunkers were given free access to Soviet newspapers to publish their opinions about non-existence of UFOs. Just like Mr. Menzel's book was published in the Soviet Union. Of all the books that could be published, it had to be Donald Menzel's book. And it gave powder to those in the Soviet Union who said, no, UFOs don't exist. Don't talk about them. Bourgeois invention. I believe Mr. Menzel is also from the bourgeois background. Doesn't matter. You will see that too. And you start seeing, as soon as there is some freedom and organization and UFO reports start coming in, somebody slams it down. And they bring American friends who express their opinions in Soviet media. How cozy. And it goes on. And yet, like grass that always tries to grow through the asphalt or cement covering, that's how Soviet UFO researchers would continue their work. It was much safer in the 1960s, 1970s, than it was, let's say, in the 1920s, when Professor Kulik had persistently led expeditions to the site of the Tunguska explosion, call it that. Much safer than when Borchenko led expeditions, KGB-sponsored, to the Kola Peninsula, which is a very interesting piece of Russian real estate that I urge you to read about in the book, because some of the most interesting cases come from the Kola Peninsula area in the northern Russia. And then we go back to ancient times, and you start seeing objects that had been placed there in the times, from the very same times as Stonehenge had been built. You'll find it all in the book yourself. It's just geographical areas I want you to know about. The area of Borisogledsk and strange immobile cloud that was observed and interacted with by Soviet Air Force. The report comes from the Setka program, not from, again, from somebody sitting on a bench outside her house. It's a very interesting case. Clouds. I've not heard many cases of cloud formations, unusual cloud formations from the West. Throughout the book, you will see reports from cosmonauts, from KGB informants, from railroad workers, from officers about strange, unusual cloud formations over Russia and in space, and observed from space. Different clouds, some of them containing UFO objects in them, and astronomers say, yeah, yes, there is a UFO inside that cloud. We don't know what it is. It changes shapes. You will see reports of very interesting, gigantic triangular objects, just like Belgian triangles. Well, they had them in the Soviet Union too. One, again, don't take it personally, was observed not too far away from Florida in an aircraft, Soviet aircraft, where Pavel Popovich, famous Soviet cosmonaut, he had seen an unusual white-collar, gigantic UFO object flying next to their plane. And he wasn't the only one. So that gives credence, I think, to those who seriously study UFO phenomena. Crashes. I need to get into that. Make up your own mind when you read the book. My opinion is this, based on my research, based on what I study now. They, Soviet government, had definitely obtained something. It's in their hands. But that's something, I don't think it would come from a crash. I just don't think our technology, that we have the capability to shoot down anything that does not abide by laws of physics. There are other reports. But we do know from a credible source, Professor Burdakov, that in 1950s, middle 1950s, Soviet scientists were again given a piece of something to assess, study, and give their opinion, their conclusion, to the people at the top. What is it that you have in your hand? What you have in your hands? How can it be used? In the middle 1950s, they didn't know. We know what it is today. It's called microchip. What they had in 1950s was a microchip. They just didn't know what it was. And this is very interesting. Where would it come from? There is a description of a very interesting case about a rocket that was uncovered, dug out from the soil of Kiev, my native city, in 1948. That rocket was actually found, I believe, in the early 1900s, but they didn't want to do anything. They had responsibility and conscience in those times, before the revolution came to the Russian Empire, not to touch it. It was beyond our belief and understanding. Stalin had no such problems. The rocket was dug out. Apparently, if it's true, if the story is true, but very interesting confirmations. It had unusual design, of course, very, very complex and advanced design, and Sanskrit writings were found inside it. 1953, a report was published 30 years about that time, because the guy who had observed what I'm about to tell you, was afraid, and I can understand why. KGB, in a special truck, comes to an apartment building in Kiev, enters a specialized apartment. They confiscate trunk full, I would say, of documents in ancient Sanskrit, Arabic, and descriptions of Star Wars-like encounters and other things, and also ancient writings from an apartment. Somebody found it, somebody kept it, somebody did not report it. Somebody was reported about to the KGB, and they came. What happened to him, what happened to the documents, we don't know. But in my opinion, this is maybe where they had recovered that microchip. They just didn't know what they had. Maybe there was a crash in the ancient times. And that's why I'm waiting for my article in Fate magazine about Professor Yefremov, a very interesting, very unusual personality of the Soviet science, research, somebody who had actually proposed ideas of finding ancient artifacts in the fields of dinosaur bones, somebody who had been to Mongolia a number of times, somebody who had been a lawbreaker, I would say, in the Soviet Union, but whose books about the future are still being read and devoured in Russia even today. He was too complicated. He had friends in the West. He had enough information, exchange of information with some scientists in UCLA. Very, very unusual personality. Somebody who might know much, who knew much more than anybody else. When he died in 1972, the KGB had sealed off his apartment, confiscated what he had. 40 volumes of information about him are contained in the KGB archives. 40 volumes of the search of his apartment, whatever they uncovered. I hope that Fate magazine gives me as much space. I mean, they're limited in space, but if not, in the future, I'll keep on writing about him too. Because with him, many of the secrets of the UFO research and just general paranormal research are contained. He found something in Mongolia. We had confirmation, very unusual find that they had not talked about for years. Again, we still don't know what's in those files, but I want you to know something. To discredit him, in the late 1980s, 1990s, rumors were circulated by KGB and whoever assumed their work, glorious work, that he was a British spy. British spy, a Soviet scientist from, who made his own way, who became one of the top paleontologists. They call him a British spy, somebody who loved his country and so forth. Something else, other rumors came about. Rumors came that he was an alien in the Soviet Union. It's still a very, very unusual case, and we'll pursue it. But you can read about him, and people like him, even in Mysterious Sky, other scientists, other authors, many of them coming from the military background, trained people who wanted to pursue this unusual phenomena in the sky. At the end, I think I'll have a brief period of questions and answers, so if you want to ask me anything, we'll get to that. But I urge you to look at the documents, because what you're looking at is history. There are some in the book, some I brought with me. You see, again, those so-called dry forms. This is actual direct. Show me one from the United States government, from the United States official research, given to the armed forces, asking them to study this strange aerial phenomena and report. Do you know where it's being reported to in the United States? I do not. I know in China they have state-sponsored research, but I don't know much about it. What I found out about the Soviet Union, it's unusual. And even from the KGB was not so much interested in UFO research. They had to get their hands on reports sent to them by their informants. So sometime in 1993, they released 124 pages of documents, and many of them are in the book too. Not all, but many references and cases. They claimed that KGB was not interested, and I think they had a point, because when KGB was interested in the UFO phenomena and other cases back in late 1920s, early 1930s, and so forth, Stalin put an end to it. People got executed, a few bloody purges, and that research was stopped within the KGB. But files do exist. Information still is here. We know how it all intertwines with the big game when they were fighting over the control of Tibet and India and Central Asia with the British Empire, and how the UFO research came about. And because of that, because of the observations that had to be taken down, we found out this about the gigantic objects sighted over the Central Asia back in 1926. But similar objects had been sighted in 1950s, 1970s, 1980s, and it doesn't stop. And again, when you start reading, when people like top Soviet armed commanders coming out when there was this period of transition to Russia in early 1990s, and they come out and say, yes, we saw this gigantic 200-meter diameter object over Moscow, we didn't shoot it down. No, there are orders not to shoot it down, at least from 1965. Yeah, we observed it. Because if you start shooting them down, they do something bad to your jets, and they have. 1953, they lost a few jets. 1960s, they lost a few around a very interesting area called the Iranian border, because there have been a lot of sightings, especially on the Soviet side, Central Asian side, during the Iran-Iraq war. And that brings another point. Whatever something interesting is brewing, UFOs are always there. You can say they don't exist, but they are. So, a colonel may not be very smart and doesn't know what Moscow wants, so a colonel writes down, what he had seen. And then this colonel gets conflicting reports. Well, they don't exist. At the same time, report them. This can drive somebody to drink, And then you find out, it's in the book, and then you find out that in that very interesting area of Borisogledsk and a few others, they had actual, don't call it contact, but at least there was some give and take between UFOs and local commanders. Somebody would stand on the ground and do signals like this or something else, and UFOs would flatten or change shape in response. So actually they tried it on the ground, and it's in the book too. It's very interesting, and I'm sure they've gone beyond that. Definitely Russian naval intelligence people did. How close they got to it, I doubt too close. You have to have mutual interest. I just don't think so that there was too much interest from the other side. I think there is the interest of making sure we don't mess up too much. Chernobyl. This is something that unfortunately Ukraine and Belarus will have for many centuries. And not only them, I believe the exposure and the damage will be to other European nations too. But bottom line is this: 1986, also in the book, there was an object sighted over the nuclear reactor number 4. An object did its best to extinguish the fire. Chernobyl, as the documents on the current Ukrainian KGB webpage demonstrate, has had problems before. And UFOs were seen there before too. Not such extreme problems as in 1986, but it's still active, and UFOs had been sighted, and dates are given in 1989 and other times. Just like around Voronezh. Well, we know about the famous Voronezh case here in the West, let's say, and Philip Mentel was instrumental in getting that information out. But it's only a tip of the iceberg, because that whole area around Voronezh, that part of Russia, not far away is the so-called Russian, I would say Area 51, but testing grounds of the top guns of the Russian aviation, air forces. And they always see UFOs. No matter how well they fly, something always comes next to them, something very unusual. And they're nervous because they're testing some of the best aircraft, and they see UFOs. They see immobile black clouds that they try to enter, and then they have problems exiting such clouds. And it's in the report, and this information also was reported by the same person that's mentioned throughout my book. His name is Plaksin. He was a colonel. He was a young military scientist involved in the Setka program, and he reveals quite a lot. And I'm glad that he's able to. And you don't I don't see this information coming from him. At some point, you have to start believing people, because if you don't, and if you get into all the conspiracies and so forth, you know, there must be a limit. And you know, you take it with a grain of salt, but and when you compare it to other cases, you start seeing, yes, what he's saying is true. And so he reports a lot about that area. He also reports about cases that we don't know too much about. I mean, the Black Ball case, and I urge you to read it. It's in that book, very unusual case from Ukraine. But the Arkhangelsk dust case that the Setka program researchers went to collect, we don't know much about it, but it's definitely something unusual. Some files contain that report. Well, Plaksin stated that Americans came up with interesting technology because of their research of UFO technology. Now, he doesn't say Americans have anything in their hands. As a matter of fact, and listen to his words very carefully, he says that he found no proof of alien civilizations being active on Earth. That's the direct translation. He doesn't say there are other forms of lives active here. He doesn't say. He phrases himself very carefully with all the release of information that he's doing, and you know, all the power to him for that. He also says that because of military secrecy, he cannot go into many cases. He cannot reveal all the information that he knows. Very unusual, very interesting. But he does specify that the Americans have achieved a lot of the breakthroughs in their most modern military technology because of the research conducted in their UFO labs. And keep it in mind. Then he goes into cases and areas of most prevalent Russian, let's say Soviet UFO observation areas. Now, when you read the book and my other research, you see that this is the same areas where other reports come from. Old reports going back centuries, and our modern time that would not, you know, those cases were not from the Setka program, yet they confirm Altai region, North Russia, Karelia. Those are amazing, amazing areas. Lake Ladoga. Some of the most interesting Russian and knowledgeable researchers believe there is something at the bottom of Lake Ladoga, maybe a base of so-called alien civilization or something else. But, you know, and you start reading cases reported by Soviet military about gigantic bodies of coming in and out of the, you know, into Soviet lakes, at that time, Soviet lakes, Lake Sarez in Central Asia. An artificially created lake that if the dam that holds it bursts, there will not be much left from Afghanistan and other areas lying beneath it. Billions of cubic meters of water will come down. It's a how should I say, ecological disaster about to happen. You see UFOs there quite frequently. Why would the Soviets see them? Well, they were spying on American satellites, SDI program. And because of that, they were actually able to see, here's what's going on. Just like the reports from the engineering forces stating that in many parts, in many lakes of the Soviet Union, they had seen so-called gigantic swimmers, and that story again is in the book, and other objects, Lake Issyk-Kul. Remember those names. You're going to hear a lot about it. And, you know, in my later research, outside of the book, published in Fate magazine, I present information about strange archaeological findings in that area, in that lake, and more. That's one of the lakes, but Lake Baikal, a very unusual body of water, quite a lot. That's in Siberia. Quite a lot is going on there. Issyk-Kul is in Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan. And those areas that have not been, they've been explored, but not to the point like the Yakutia area, taiga. Yeah, you can go there on helicopters and so forth, but you need to spend time. And I hope somebody does, because areas like Yakutia may contain an answer to our questions if there is an alien civilization on this planet. Why? Because from the time immemorial, local people report gigantic bodies falling down from the sky on Earth, metallic bodies embedded in the soil, in the permafrost soil. They would come, nomads, whatever, local tribal people to the area. They would spend very unhappy hours because they started losing hair after spending some time next to the gigantic cauldrons and some other objects in the soil. And they would become sick, strange sicknesses. We know after what happened, with the nuclear explosions in Ukraine and, in Japan, they didn't know what it was. So they would start putting taboos on the area, saying, don't go there anymore. And locals would not. The Russians did, and also they did not suffer good. Some of them became very sick. The point is that they believed that there is something in the ground of Yakutia. Local people reported stories, and we go quite in detail about it. Something that shoots down incoming bodies once in a while. Well, I believe next year will be 100th anniversary of the Tunguska case. And I think this may be one of the largest chapters in the book, and we'll continue research. Because whatever happened over Tunguska may hold the key to other research. And we still don't know, like I said, what it is, but there is research. We're not the only ones interested. Detailed information about expeditions to the site are in the book. What amazes me is that at the very same time, top-notch Russian scientific expedition was on site studying flora and fauna of the Far East. Detailed entries are in their diaries. They never mention the explosion. It's like it was wiped out from their mind, or somebody took it out from the diaries. I mean, Russian scientists from the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences were as educated as those coming from Cambridge or Tokyo. They never mention it. And then a year later, some other very strange, unusual expedition makes its way to the area. We still don't know about them. We know that Stalin sent his expedition in 1949, actually Beria. I'm sure Stalin had a little part in it too. They wanted to know what happened in that area. And where are those files? We know they were on site. We know who they were and so forth. What happened to their findings? I don't know, but they do exist. So that is one of the most interesting cases to keep in mind, the Tunguska one. It will develop, it will go on, and people will continue research. And if we have good technology and less debunkers and people who say mosquitoes don't exist on our backs, we'll find out more. But again, there is no more government-sponsored funding for that. And even in the Soviet Union, there wasn't that much. When it came to Tunguska, Korolev had to pay his own money to send a helicopter expedition to the area, but he knew he needed to go there. They knew there is something over there to recover. Other interesting cases I want you to keep in mind as you read the book is the Monchegorsk object of 1986. If we could get Mr. Gorbachev here maybe next year, he will help us, I'm sure. Because 1987, sorry, he knew. He changed his itinerary, I believe, to go see that object, but he's too shy to talk about it. Small shuttle-like object recovered. No, it's not recovered. They found it out of nowhere. They, meaning Soviet military people in the northern Russia, around Leningrad. Kept it, put it in a closed-off area, studied it, even tried to break something because they couldn't. Small shuttle, like from very miniature people. And you will see the description. It's unusual. I mean, Spielberg doesn't come up with ideas like that. After a while, it simply disappears from their hangar. Gone. And again, it's not hearsay. It's not Uncle Ivan just, weaving his stories. You see a lot of information, maybe not as much as we would want to. And I don't believe the Setka talks too much about it. But then again, we don't know what the Setka, we don't know all of the reports from the Setka research. We do know enough to make you angry. Angry to the point is, why is it that UFO existence being denied and well-paid, I guess, debunkers spend their life existence trying to say it doesn't exist, when definitely Soviets had something in their hands, and Americans knew enough to keep an eye on them. And Soviets knew that 20%, according to the Setka, could not be explained. Of those 25%, and Soviet Academy of Sciences also said, well, 5% are bodies that are of physical nature unknown to us that must be explored further. Even that, saying even that is enough. They were not, again, although they had the research, they had to be shy. They had to abide by Marxism, Leninism. And I remember as a child, you had to study this nonsense. They made us study it in school. And, you spend hours waiting for toilet paper and lines and then have him to memorize what Marx wrote 100 years ago. Life is wasted, but there are people, but you have to live with it. You can't say no. You say no too much. If you say you want Ukraine to be free and independent, then you find your way to Gulag, where you also have chances to observe UFOs. Don't misunderstand. One of the most interesting cases from 1953. I want to thank Veniamin Dodin, who is not alive anymore, but who was a well-heeled scientist who knew quite a lot. He was banished after spending time in the Gulag. He was banished to a very bad area in Siberia. My dad, who was in the armed forces in those areas, told me quite a lot. Anyway, this gentleman sees something in 1953 over the skies of Siberia. Again, similar reports coming late 1970s from the Soviet counterintelligence, naval counterintelligence. I mean, the description boggles your mind. And I want to be, it took me, I should apply, I should probably apply to the White House to be an interpreter, just in the technical. I'm laughing. I know my Russian is no better than anybody else's, but I've studied. I have such dictionaries to translate the information accurately. Sometimes I read what others translate, our official people. It's not the same. I want to be, this is not to prop myself. No, I don't want to be a model. What I want to say is that I wanted to be as detailed as possible in my translations of the reports. And when you read the observation in 1984 of an object over a Soviet naval ship, oh my God. And then you see the description of this gigantic object over Siberia in 1953. And you got to give it not to me, to Dodin, Veniamin Dodin, who put it down on paper in his mind. And he wrote it down somewhere, and he had to hide it because don't forget, he was under observation. He was an official exile. So, interesting. I believe now is the time for answers and questions. Sorry, I got carried away. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful report. I think I heard you on Coast to Coast.
Thank you.
I have an old article from 1983 about a blitz, a UFO blitz over the Russian-Soviet spaceport, and they said that the craft pulled all the nuts and bolts out of the rocket launcher pad and even melted the joints that were welded. Do you have a report on that one?
You know what I think happened? I think it was. I think they have a tendency to blame mishaps on UFOs. When so-called UFOs try to get something, they would get it without any problems. They don't have to take it apart. Read the book. Read 1983 cases. You may find it, but because there is quite a lot about cosmodromes and testing areas. What's interesting is that UFOs were present over such cosmodromes from 1957 on. When the Soviets started space race, they were there.
Thank you for sharing with us. Soviet research and psychic research is legendary. Do you know if there are psychics in Russia that are in the Soviet Union, former, that are studying these things too?
Fate magazine. Not long ago, they published my article about Dr. Messing, Who knew Freud? Who knew Einstein? Go into it. He helped. He was a refugee who was given a refuge in the Soviet Union. Very interesting. And more.
Sir, just a point of clarification. Were you suggesting that there's an alien base in Siberia that shot down the Tunguska object?
Yes, and maybe what I suggest, what other scientists do, is that there may be a base in Siberia that's automatically programmed to shoot down bodies that are assessed of being capable of harming Earth.
Would there be other bases on other continents?
I can only speak about Russia. I heard about Crete, okay, in my research, but I don't want to go into it. It's not my area of research.
And how large was the explosion? I'd heard 40 megatons.
Yes. And very bad influence after that. Okay, that's it? Okay, I want to thank you for your time. If you want to get in touch with me, Fate Magazine. Thank you.